patrons, welcome to another lesson. In today's lesson, we're going to be painting chibi miniatures. I think that this is one of my most popular lessons that I like to teach. People always request eyes and hair because they seem to be the most unique technique to learn for painting these miniatures. For those of you that don't know what chibi miniatures are, they're a cartoon Japanese style figure that's popular for games like Super Dungeon Explorer and Arcadia Quest. Today we're going to cover painting eyes and hair on this little guy right here. He's a Bones Villain from Reaper Miniatures. He is Dracula. So okay, let's get started. Alright patrons, we're going to get started on the eyes first. I want to show you guys the colors I'll be using. I'm going to use a walnut brown for my base coat of the eyes. I'm going to be using a black red by Vallejo mixed with a little bit of this creamy ivory to get the whites of the eyes. And then I will be using a verdigris dark green by Secret Weapon and a pale saffron for the color of the eyes. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so we're going to be starting off with the eyes, like I mentioned before, and I'm going to start off, I have walnut brown for the for painting in the base coat of the eyes to start off dark, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this creamy ivory, and I'm going to add a little bit of red. If you look at eyes, they naturally have a little bit of red to them, and this helps your figures look more realistic. So, it's not much, it's just a little bit, so you guys can get an idea. I'll start from a pinkish color and work my way up to white. So I'll show you how I do that on the miniature. Alright. You can see that I already have my skin tones painted. I did this in preparation for the video. I like to paint my skin tones first and then paint my eyes in, because what I'm going to do, and I've done a little bit here already, is I go in and I paint my eyes a dark color. So let's go in and add just another base coat, and this helps to just clean things up. In case you get the skin tone color in the eyes. This darker color also helps with a technique called lining, which I really like to do for eyes. What we're going to do is we're going to paint the white, but we're going to leave a small line around the where we're painting the white. And it's going to help differentiate where the eye and the skin meet and really make those eyes pop. So once you get in there and you get a good base color down, I'll let this dry and I'll move on to the white. Just wanted to actually give a shout out for you guys. I got some brushes from Slow Fuse Games. They sent me some brushes, and so I've been trying those out, and so far I really like them. They're really good workhorse brushes. So I just want to say thank you to Slow Fuse Games for sending me some brushes to try out. Now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna add that pink color I showed you, that off white mixed with the red. And what we're gonna do is, actually when I'm doing this, and this might help you paint eyes as well, is I'm going to start in the middle and work my way up and down, and that way I have a little bit more control and I can leave that line around the eye. And you can go ahead and gauge how thick or thin you want this line to be. You obviously don't want it to be too thick, but you want to be able to see the distinction between the skin and where the white of the eye is. I just go slow, and I'll usually go back over where I painted. For a second layer, just to make sure it has a nice coverage. Alright, now that I've got that eye, I'll move on to the next eye, and I'll fill that one in too. Alright, now that we've got that first layer in, and we've picked out our line around the eye, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to add more and more white and work up to that creamy ivory color. So where you want to focus more of your highlight and work up is right here to about the middle of the eye. And remember, this is a round shape, so it's going to have more of a highlight here and here. Alright, so now that we've come up all the way to our highlight in our eye, I'm going to go and I'm going to add the pupil and the iris. I encourage people to Google images for chibis. There's so many fantastic and just different ways you can paint eyes. I'm going to show you the simplest way I approach it, but feel free to find some different variations and try different ones for yourself. Before we get started on the pupil and the iris, I want to show people a really easy way to direct where you want the eyes to be looking. So I start out with a walnut brown, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a very thin layer, and I'm going to almost sketch in a circle, and this helps you figure out where you want the miniature to look and make sure that it is the right direction so he's not cross-eyed. So I start with some very thin paint, and it's a darker color, and I just start, and I think I want him to be looking more this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here at the top, and you can see how it's just a very thin coat, and I start and I keep adding a little bit more. And it's so thin that if you don't like what it looks like, you can just take some water and you can take the paint that you've put down out of the eye without ruining the white underneath. Okay, I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Start up near the top and keep adding to the circle. I'm painting on his nose. Uh-oh. Technical difficulties. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit more here. And then the other thing I like to do before I lay down any more paint is I like to flip the miniature over. So if you can see, when you flip the miniature over, you can tell how big the eyes are and if the eyes are both the right size. And this is just really helpful and kind of cut some of the frustration out of that. So they look like they're both pretty even. So I'm going to go back. And I'm going to add in some more color, some more walnut brown, and just kind of make it so the edges are more defined in the eye. Alright, now that I've done that and I've put in my eye placement, now I'm going to go and add some color on my palette and we can start painting the iris of the eye. Alright, now we're going to do the color of the eye. So I'm going to do a Verdigris dark green. I'm going to start with a green base. And then I'm going to work my way up to this saffron or pale saffron yellow. I figured he would look good with some yellow eyes, and green is easier to transition from yellow to green. So I'll show you guys how I'm going to mix and work my way up. So I'll start with my dark color, I'll work my way to my middle color, and then I'll end up with my last color being the yellow. Alright, now we're going to paint the color into the eyes. I did forget to mention that when you're first starting off, especially with chibi eyes since they're so big, it's easier to try and paint the pupil and the iris either on one side of here or the other side of the eye. This makes it easier so you don't make him look like he's just staring at his nose or one eye's floating over here and one eye's over here. So that's just an easy trick for when you're just starting out painting eyes. Alright, now we're going to add the color. Before I get started with the color, I want to kind of show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to add just a horseshoe, essentially, or a U shape of color starting here, and I'm going to leave this dark because this is the pupil, and I'm going to paint in the iris of the eye. So I'm going to start with that green, the verdigris dark green, and I'm just going to, I'm using a small brush, and I'm just going to paint a U all the way up. I had to fix it. I took a little paint off his eye. Right there. Oh no. There we go. And you can always come back in like I just did. If you feel like you get too much, if you paint too far up, you can just add this dot back in. I know some people even like to paint the whole thing the green color, then come back down and paint to your brighter color here, and then add the dark spot back in. That is a perfectly acceptable way to paint eyes. I'm going to go to the other side, and I'll paint the U shape here. And I'll go back in and touch it up a little bit. Alright. Now I'm going to move to that middle color. Another thing you're going to want to keep in mind, much like how we did this dark line around the eye, I try to do that with here as well between the color and the white of the eye. Okay, now I'm going to go and add a little yellow at the bottom. I'm just barely touching. The bottom of the eye right there. Alright, and you can see how it's such a small area, so you really get a smooth transition even when you're just barely putting the color in there. Alright, now we're going to go and we're going to put the gleam or the reflection in the eye, and I think that as the last step, this really brings the whole skin and face together and really makes the eyes pop. So we're going to do that. We'll be using my heavy body, my Liquitex heavy body white. And what we're going to do is we're going to place the gleam of the eye wherever the light source would be. So keep in mind your light source when you're putting in this highlight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend like my light source is up here, and the gleam of his eye will be here and here on this side. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. So it's as simple as just coming in with a steady hand. You can brace your hand and just putting in the little white of the eye right here. And I might go back over it. If you want to be fancy, sometimes you can put a little dot here, just stylistic. Just barely there. And then the other side. There, and again a little dot right there. Oh, and then I paint outside the lines. All right, and you can see that that just really brings the eye together. Right. Now we're going to tackle the hair of the miniature. For the hair, I've chosen to do a blue color up to almost a gray. So I have Corporal Shadow. Did you get it? if it'll work. I'll use Corporal Shadow as my base color. I'm going to use Burgundy Wine as my shadow color. It's a red, and it'll look good in the shadows because it's a contrasting color. So we're going to put that sparingly in the shadows. And then I'm going to use Rubber Highlight from Secret Weapon as my next color up from my blue. And I have Weathered Wood as the next color up from the rubber. And then of course I'll use the titanium white here that's already on my palette for my highlights in my hair. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to use my Corporal Shadow as my base coat, but then after that I'm going to add in a little bit of this red in the shadows like I said before. After that I'm going to work up to my blue, so like in my other videos I mix between the two and take from one to the other to get an idea of a color in between. And then I'll go from my blue to the white. Alright, let's get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Corporal Shadow and paint in my base coat. Remember to be careful and try not to paint outside the lines since we already have the skin tones down. Oh. I painted on him. I did what I told you guys not to do. That's okay. A little bit of water takes care of that if you catch it quick enough. And I won't forget his eyebrows. Alright, I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come back in with a little bit of that burgundy wine to put in the shadows. Mainly down here. I'm going to paint in a little bit. I thinned the paint down just a little bit with some water on my brush. It's almost a controlled wash. And when it dries, it's going to dry fairly thin. So if you want to deepen that shadow a little bit more, you can come back in once it's dry and add some more color. Another little trick I like to do is I like to clean my brush off and take this paint while it's still wet and kind of soften that edge where I put the paint down. I'll add just a little bit here. And I want to darken it just a little bit. I'm going to add some more now that it's dry. And I'll make it just a little darker back here. Controlled wash. Alright, now that we've got some shadows in, we're going to go and we're going to work up to our highlight. So the thing about chibi hair is that you have these really broad spaces that you have to work with, and that's, I think, one of the unique things about painting chibi miniatures, and one of the things that intimidates people when they're working with it. So how I tackle this is, if you look, there's some sculpting done here, and you have a little bit of the texture. But what I like to do, and I'll show you as I start to paint, is I like to work in sections. So I'm going to start in big, broad sections and paint essentially volumes of hair. If you think about it, it's rounded like my eyes. So I'm going to work up and make it so it looks like volumes or sections of hair, and pick out areas here and then work my way up. So let me show you how I do that. So I'm starting with a mix between my corporal shadow and my rubber color to kind of pick out the areas. You don't really, when I'm painting the hair, I'm not worried about making it super smooth, because hair, naturally you can see some of the strands. So you can see how I start to get sections of hair. And I'll work in smaller and smaller areas. Okay, you can see that I've started and I've picked out the sections. And this is how I start painting the hair. And we'll start working our way up to that weathered wood highlight. Alright, and I don't want to forget the eyebrows. So when we're painting the eyebrows, I'm going to concentrate more of my highlight up here at the top. And I'll do some edge highlighting. I'll grab the other one. The other thing you're going to want to keep in mind when you're painting hair like this is that most of my highlight is going to be up here. We're going to try to concentrate our highlight up here and kind of make it so you can see I'm trying to make it fade more in the back. You can kind of get the idea that it's just very loose painting. Unlike the eyes, it doesn't require as much brush control. And if your hands shake a little bit, that's okay. I'm going to start working my way up to the weathered wood, so I'm mixing colors in between the weathered wood and the rubber highlight. And again, I'm thinking about keeping most of my highlight up here, so I'm not going quite as far with that brighter color. You can see I start to add a little bit more detail too. I use the thinner brush strokes to make it look like some individual strands of hair. And I don't want to forget about the front of the hair here. So I'm going to go in and add the details in here. I'm trying to keep this lighter gray color up near the top of the eyebrow here, so it looks like a highlight on the eyebrow. I'm using my edge of the brush to accomplish this. And I get this little piece of hair here. I'm just working my way up to a highlight right there in the middle. And then I'll come back to the sides here. Don't want to forget about some of the small details. Alright, I'm going to work up to that weathered wood. And again, I'm going to concentrate in a smaller area. And I'm actually going to change my brush size. I'm going to go to my smaller brush since I don't need to cover as much area. And that smaller brush is a size 0. It's Rosemary and Company, Series 33. Can see how I'm concentrating in smaller and smaller areas, and it's starting to look more and more like a highlight on the hair. And again, when you're putting in your highlights, you want to think about your light source. And since we determined with this miniature that my light source was pretty much up above his head, maybe off to the side slightly, that the reflection would be more towards the top here. I'm putting one highlight here on his head. When I have female miniatures, they might have longer hair, and so I actually will catch several highlights, especially if they have curly hair. You want to catch highlights on the curls of their hair too. So that's something to keep in mind. For this guy, he's got short hair. And again, I'm working my way up to that weathered wood. You can see in a smaller and smaller area. And then I'll come back in and I'll add the heavy body titanium white as my last highlight. Alright, now I'm going to add the titanium white, and I take a little bit and I thin it down just a bit, and I'm going to apply it in the smallest area of my highlight. And I'll probably put several layers on. So you can get a nice buildup of that bright white color. I'm not mixing it with anything, it's just straight from the tube. You can see how it really starts to make it look like it has a real shine. And I might hit right there, just on the edges. And if it's too bright, it's too much of a contrast, I'll just go in with my gray and kind of smooth that out on the edges right there. And I'll come back in with my white, keep working on that bright highlight. And another thing to keep in mind, the white tends to blur all together. So I'll go and I'll just paint a little bit so there's not as many hard dark lines right where that bright highlight is. And last but not least, we don't want to forget right here. So I'm going to put just a little bit of a white highlight there, and then the white highlight on his eyebrow up near the top here. And again, I'm going to use the edge of my brush. Just grab that section. Right there. And I might even take a little bit just to give the front of his hair here a little bit more interest. Add a couple of highlights right here on the front, just to make him look a little bit more interesting. All right, and I'm going to call that done. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. I hope that you found the lesson on painting chibi eyes and hair helpful. And as always, feel free to comment below and we will get back to you. And hopefully this was an excellent video. Thanks so much.